Should men be watching porn? What's the real cost of sexual shame? Do you truly know the deeper parts of yourself? And could exploring them set you free? In this episode, I'm joined by IFS therapist and sex and desire coach Forrest Benedict, who shares his powerful journey from a childhood shaped by religious trauma and family struggles to a life dedicated to helping others heal. Together, we dig into how early conditioning shapes our identity, how shame disconnects us from ourselves, and what it actually takes to reclaim self-acceptance and sexual integrity. Along the way, we confront the ethical complexities around pornography and the tough question of whether men should be watching it. This is a conversation about going beyond surface level self-improvement into the real work of facing shame, desire, and the parts of ourselves we often hide. I really enjoyed this one, particularly because of how engaging it was, and while we didn't always agree at times, you'll want to stay tuned to find out whether we find common ground. Do please let me know your thoughts. If you could kindly like, subscribe, and leave a review, I'd really appreciate it, and it means that we can reach more men who are navigating their journey. Thank you so much. I'm Harrison, and this is the Growth Voyage podcast. Enjoy. Forrest, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Harrison. I'm so excited to be here with you.
Yeah, really looking forward to getting into this one. And yeah, the way I like to start off these conversations is at the beginning of the journey, right? And a lot of the time it's our childhood and our early experiences that shape who we go on to become in the future. So yeah, please tell me a little bit about how that experience was like for you.
Yeah, thank you. I had I would say things started off pretty challenging for me as a kid. My dad was an alcoholic and bipolar and also super religious. And so I was mainly raised by my mom and ended up really wanting to impress and please my dad and just connect with him, and yet just had honestly just so many difficult experiences growing up, and really had, I would say, like a father wound. Like really wanted a dad, wanted someone to guide me and show me the way, so to speak, as a man, and just I just wanted a dad. I did have other male influences, like through Boy Scouts and just other areas where I connected with men. But yeah, being raised by my mom, um, I would say just changed things for me. But but yeah, also the religion piece was really big for me. Like I really was a very sexual person, teenager, and yet because of my religion, I I was very much against fighting my sexuality and very much about suppressing it, and just had a ton of self-judgment, self-criticism, and kind of reoriented my life around fighting lust because I thought it was so bad. And so, yeah, I mean that's just kind of a intro to what led me to the field that I'm in now. It all started with fighting sexuality.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll dive into that very soon. I'm keen to touch upon the father piece as well, right? Because it's such an important part in the man's story. The father shows the son, how to go into the world and how to make connections, how to connect with other men, but also be a role model. And also he breaks that monogamous bond with the mother too. So what was that like? You hinted at it before. Were you constantly seeking his approval, validation, some type of relationship, and how did you comprehend that as a kid? How did that shape your reality?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge because I think I actually became more passionate about religion because my dad was super Christian, and I feel like I figured out lots of ways to perform in the world and be very impressive with school, with Boy Scouts, with kind of everything I did. And I just really like longed for his connection and attention and approval, validation for sure. Even I, but then I resented him for not teaching me like basic stuff like how to shave or how to fix a car or things that I thought he was supposed to teach me. It definitely didn't teach me anything really healthy about sexuality. But then also being raised by my mom, I feel like and she was amazing. She definitely was my hero. She saved us from a lot of crazy situations, protected us from our dad when he got really crazy and difficult. But I feel like my relationship with my mom, like she was the dominant one in the relationship, and it really suppressed me. Suppressed my um, confidence and like strength and kind of my dominance. And she was like very controlling. And so it really didn't allow me to really step into my strength as a person, as a man, and I didn't have a lot of examples either of kind of what healthy masculinity was. So it was complex.
Yeah, and I can imagine you're kind of searching out there and a bit lost and confused, right? Who am I supposed to be? And your sense of self kind of gets lost in that journey as well. And I can imagine because of the dynamic between your parents, what's happened is she's taken on the masculine role. So she's, but like you suggested, very strong and shielding the kids from anything that's bad in this instance. But then at the same time, when you step into that masculine role, I presume you also lose a touch of that motherly side as well. So, talk to me about that relationship there. You said that, well, it was very controlling, right? How did that impact you, do you reckon?
Yeah, like I think she was, and I give her credit because she was in a very scary situation because my dad was unstable and unsafe in many ways. So she became like the protector of me and my sister. But through that process, she was also like very I would say overprotective and like didn't give me enough like opportunities to kind of like lead myself, and it was like kind of like she was the one keeping me safe. And yeah, it's interesting because it's only been the last year or so that I've actually started working on my mother issues and kind of how that impacted me, because my whole life I felt like I was just had daddy issues. And it's just become recently that I've really been able to pursue healing from the ways that yeah, just living under a dominant mom and how that affected me. And it's been quite a journey. It's been very empowering, honestly, to work through it, but it really had an effect on me.
And I can imagine it's not just the dynamics in that relationship, but also projecting fear onto the world with that over protectionism. So then that would affect the way you show up and the way you can relate to people and almost stop you from going out there exploring the world too. So I can imagine that that had a big impact, definitely.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It affected my like self-confidence. I had a lot of self-doubt. And yeah, it was almost like I became hyper vigilant about my own behavior and just, I mean, I've still achieved a lot in my life. Like, and honestly, there's so many ways that my mom has benefited me, and our relationship has been beneficial in different ways. But yeah, it definitely affected me in ways. Yeah, I just, it's almost like just afraid to make mistakes in the world and just go and try things. It's like very, very cautious.
That's an interesting point because a lot of the time when we talk about perfectionism, for example. That's a great example. A lot of the time it's, oh, well, I just have high standards. But I think there's a great difference between having high standards for yourself and perfectionism. And as you suggest, I think a lot of the time it's rooted in your subjective experience of the world as a kid, right? Like, can't be seen to be failing or need to get everything right all the time.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, 100%. And that's the thing. I'm an IFS therapist and coach, and so I really a lot of the work I've done is like kind of understanding the parts of me that run my life. And a lot of that's based on the roles they learned in childhood. And that was like one of the biggest things for me was just perfect have a part of me that's super perfectionistic and definitely have a part of me that it puts kind of puts on a show, like is all about external validation and pleasing everyone. And like you and I have talked about that nice guy that's like just wants to be like, like seen as a good, nice guy, but it's just all these things that kind of masked my authenticity and just who I really was underneath.
Yes, and it's this underlying belief system. I have to perform a certain way. I have to be a certain way. I have to show myself to the world as a certain way in order to be loved and accepted and validated, right? So you kind of lose your sense of self in the process. And I'm keen to hear where that led you. What signs were there that you were out of alignment and not being authentic in the way you show up in the world? What were the signs? And I think it's important to talk about this because you're talking about a belief system, right? You don't know that you're doing it a lot of the time. You don't even, sometimes you're not even aware you're showing up to the world in this way. So talk me through how that looked like for you, the way you were showing up in the world as you went into your teens and adult years.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the thing. In my teens and adult years, like what kind of led me even into becoming a therapist was like getting attention around fighting lust and fighting porn and being like the example of purity, and like that's what I'd say I followed that attention into my career and ended up in my career becoming what I would say was the most impressive that I could possibly be, and like setting myself up as the real example. And, I had a book, Life After Lust. I had a book about fighting porn and fighting lust. And, like I was a high achieving person, but a lot of it was, you know, at my own expense, so to speak, because I wasn't really checking in with like who I was and what I wanted to be, but I was living for like God, what I thought God was, and for people, and kind of set up a whole life around what's going to impress other people, and just following attention. Like that was my compass was what's going to impress other people.
I'm really intrigued by this religious influence, right? Because I was just discussing this today, actually, where the meaning of religion and the original purpose of why it was created, I think it gets very distorted, and we can take messages from biblical texts and we can use them and manipulate them to our way of thinking. And this is the disconnect, I think. And this is what puts people away from religion. It's this whole, well, you have to be a certain way. It's very fixed, and it's being used to push agendas and wars, and there's so much negative connotation. And especially in Christianity, the underlying sense that I get when you look at some of the message of Jesus, it was actually, okay, we're all actually imperfect. You are loved and you are whole as you are now. But then this idea of you have to be this perfect person, you cannot sin, I think it throws a lot of people off. And like you were saying, if it does the opposite, in the sense that people can feel a lot of shame for being a certain way, feeling a certain way, and it gets repressed and it's not talked about. And I imagine in really strict religious settings, you're not actually encouraged to speak about it. It's, whoa, no, that's sinful. That has to be hidden. And then when that's a part of yourself, I can imagine that causes tremendous angst and pain and confusion as if you're trying to be somebody else, right?
Yeah. And for me, that was especially in the realm of sexuality because, there's such a ethic of like purity in how I was raised, around who you can be sexual with. And, like I waited till I was married to have sex for the first time. Like that was a big part of saving yourself for marriage. And I thought I was in recovery. I called myself in recovery for porn addiction. And like like I went 17 years without porn or masturbating. So a big section of my life was committed to that. Like that was my commitment because of what I felt God wanted. And I felt like all that was just sinful and wrong. So I had to fight it. Even though it was like the most powerful force inside me is my sexuality, is as I see it now, is a very powerful, important part of myself and part of my self expression. But yeah, I definitely set up a whole life around fighting that. And then I figured out a way to make a career out of that and lead other people in fighting their own lust. That was what I was most passionate about.
Well, that's the beauty about this journey, right? Because your pain, your deepest pain, often becomes the way that you can give back. Your biggest pain becomes your biggest or deepest purpose, which is beautiful. And I think the trouble is, as you've suggested, I think there's a big line between, okay, some stuff perhaps it might not be. I don't like to use the term right or wrong, but people label certain things, certain activities. Okay, this is what maybe you should do, shouldn't do based off of religious teachings or morality or whatever you think is right and wrong. But I think there's a big difference between being disciplined in terms of sexuality, and we'll certainly talk about this. There's discipline and but owning that part of you. So it's you own that part, but then you use your discernment how to express it and use it in a controlled way. And I think there's a big difference between that and almost shaming that part of yourself and denying it doesn't exist. And I think that is it's a really fine line and it's a really important one too.
Yeah, and honestly, like one way that I would prefer to look at that is like, what do I want to do sexually? What are my sexual values as I connect with myself and my sexuality versus what do other people or God supposedly think I should do with my life? And I mean, that's a lot of the work that I do is helping people connect with themselves and decide what they want to do. That's different. If you want to be disciplined about staying aligned with your values, that's way different than working to stay aligned with somebody else's values.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And the reason why I suggested that was because a lot of the time in Western society, and I say this because I observed it in myself. Sometimes we're seeking that validation, right? That we won't give ourselves, and we look for that through other people and partners in whatever capacity they will be. And there's a deep underlying challenge there because you're looking to fill a void in yourself, and it's very easy to think, oh, okay, this is just who I am, and I like certain female validation and company, but there's something underlying underneath the surface. And I think if you're in a place where coming from a whole place and you're like, no, like I value this part of myself, then I think that's, and it's coming from a whole place and it's not filling a void. It's not seeking that pleasure, perhaps that short term pleasure just to keep staying on the same wheel. And this is what I think I've observed quite a lot actually, is that often I think especially casual sex has become so deeply ingrained in our society, right? And when you look at again, there's that conflict there with traditional values and what sex should be and what it shouldn't be. Although I think when it's so deeply ingrained in society, a lot of the time, especially when you're young and figuring this stuff out, when you sort of normalize this behavior and you don't know the deep underlying challenges that are going on, I think that's where it gets complicated. So I'm keen to hear how you have progressed in your journey and being able to shift between, okay, this is just filling a part of me I can't give to myself versus no, like I'm approaching this from a really aligned place and it's aligned with my values.
Yeah, well, and that's where like the work I do with IFS is so important. And I've done that's what I'd say was a significant shift in my own journey was when I actually started doing deeper work in getting to know myself on a very deep level. And now I'm an IFS therapist and coach, but I want to invite people into getting to know themselves on a deep level. And so getting to know their sexual parts of them, because some of those sexual parts of them might be rooted and related to some type of trauma or, numbing behavior, or like we talked about, validation from others. Or it might just be related to who they are sexually and just a healthy sexuality that's not based on the culture or the religion or whatever else. So, I mean, and this is a real challenge to people. Like, I want to, or I guess it's a real invitation, is to not just make all these decisions based on what your intellectual brain thinks you should do, but really get to know yourself deeply and get to know these behaviors, get to know these parts of you, and you can really come to understand why you're doing what you're doing on a much deeper level than just using your intellectual brain to try and reason and logic yourself through it all.
Yes, that's a wicked point, and I love how you mentioned societal conditioning as well. And I've always mentioned that okay, whatever society's doing, generally do the opposite because everyone's kind of following a deeply ingrained way about doing things. And again, we're all just a product of our experiences of the world, and often we just follow the norm, what other people are doing. I'm really intrigued to touch upon a point that you mentioned there. So, when a sexual part of ourselves that we feel is within us, it's a part of us, but it's come from some type of trauma from childhood. How would you navigate that then? And I'm really, really intrigued by this because then it becomes, wait, is this a part of me or is this something I've got to work through first? I find this fascinating.
So in IFS, we can kind of get to know a part of us. In IFS, they kind of see the psyche as like we have all these different parts that have different jobs and different roles that are trying to protect us from different things. We do have like our true self, but part of the journey is getting to know the parts of us. So if we say we got curious about a part, like, okay, say I wanted to watch porn all the time, and I was like, okay, I want to get to know that part. Like we can, IFS kind of gives us a framework for getting to know that part from a non judgmental place, not as a way of trying to change it or fix it or heal it, but through interacting with that part of us, we can gain the history of that part and why it's doing it. And if it is, like, say, using porn to like protect you from feeling lonely or depressed or anxious, then there might be something deeper that needs to be healed. And then you won't really need to be watching porn for that reason. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm just this is the way I've looked to approach various other things. Smoking, for example, I was a chain smoker. I used to smoke sometimes 40, 50 cigarettes a day when I was traveling, and what I found was the way most people do it is using willpower, and it's placing a great emphasis on the smoking. So the mindset is, oh, I really want that cigarette. Oh, it's so nice, and you put the cigarette on a pedestal, and it creates this really tough, hard resistance that you can't really break away from, and that's why you end up in the same pattern. And the way in which I quit was using Alan Carr's easy way to stop smoking. And his approach was just using the easy way. So the hard way is the willpower. Well, what's the easiest way to stop smoking? It's by not wanting a cigarette in the first place. So the whole book, it's an audio book. He's got one on nicotine and vaping, but then he's also got one on smoking. And the whole approach there is rewiring your brain, getting rid of all these belief systems that smoking doesn't actually relax you and makes you more stressed. And it's going through all the movies, all these women in their dresses in the 1960s, and they're smoking a cigarette and it looks very glamorous. And then you're seeing now with all these elf bars and these vapes, people are, yeah, they look very great, and you see people out and about in bars and they've got their vapes and they look so happy and relaxed, but it's breaking that illusion that no, like all of these guys, whether they admit it or not, they would rather not be vaping or smoking. And it's breaking the illusion, because what smoking actually does is it might give you 10% this feeling of relaxed, but usually your baseline's here. So it will give you that 10%, but then it'll make you 100% more stressed, for example. And then all the smoking does, it gives you maybe 10, 20% back, and then you go back to the 100. So it's, once you become aware of the cycle, it becomes a logical decision. I don't want to stop smoking. This is why if you tell people 100 times it will give you lung cancer, it's full of carcinogens, they don't care, because they think that the smoking relaxes you. And I wonder, in your case with the porn, the trouble is that people think, oh, I really want to watch it, it gives me this pleasure, and they can't control their sexual desires. So then what they do is they do it, and then they feel shame, and to fill that gap of shame they do it more and more and more, and it keeps them stuck in this cycle. So I love that a part of that journey is actually not wanting to watch it in the first place and understanding why you're doing it.
Well, yeah, and this is where we might diverge a little bit in thinking about like the porn issue per se, because like in my view and experience, if you got to know a part of you that wanted to watch porn, you could find out that it's doing it to try and help you avoid some type of pain, but you could also find out that it's just doing it because it likes it and it's just part of what you want to do sexually. And in my view, that's perfectly fine as long as it's not hurting you or anyone else. Um, so that's the thing is I'm about kind of not judging the behavior and just saying all porn use is wrong, but getting to know the part of you that wants to view the porn and finding out what's driving it. Because if it's related to some type of, addictive cycle, that's different than just like, wow, I just wanted to watch porn tonight. It just sounds fun. I'm just horny and I wanted to. To me, that's very different. And I think personally, I know we might have different views on porn per se, but I think personally, if that's part of somebody's sexual expression, like it's not hurting anyone, why not? Why not allow that?
Yeah, I think we can both agree that mindlessly doing it unconsciously, it can be damaging when you don't actually know the reason why you're engaging in it. And I also see how shaming the behavior can be detrimental, and that's the reason why it's a huge problem in the first place, is that it's hidden and it's not brought to the surface and it's not talked about. So I definitely see that. And I also think a big part of it as well is talking with other men about your experiences and getting it out there. And then I think to battle shame, a big reason why shame is so prevalent is because it stays hidden. And I think if we can just normalize talking about these types of topics, and which is why I'm big fan of the work that you've done with porn as well, normalize it, and then suddenly it's not as shameful. You don't need to hide it. I am concerned with porn use, particularly with its exposure with like kids, for example, under the age of 18. And you'd see it in school all the time, especially my era when kids your age started watching this stuff, and then it can really distort your view of what real sex is like, and how a lot of the sex you'll see on these sites would be, yeah, they wouldn't be realistic, right? And they would give a distorted view. Perhaps certain private parts will look a certain way, and you think, oh, why isn't mine that way? Or, in the female case, it might be, oh, well, they're not hairy, so maybe I shouldn't be either. And I think that can be very damaging. And I think the getting to a place where you sort of watch it just because you want to get some ideas for your own sexuality. um, for me, it seems like you'd have to be in a very conscious place and a very healed place to be able to engage in that consciously. And my concern there would be, well, how many people are actually at that stage, and because our belief systems are very strong, right? And so I know in my case, I told myself, well, I don't need female validation, I don't need any of the stuff, I just like female company. But then now looking back on that period of my life, I was very much filling a void and doing it for a certain reason. So that's the challenge I have there is, okay, how much people really know if they haven't gone through your therapy and they haven't integrated these parts, how would they even know that, because the belief system is so strong.
Yeah. Well, and this is a very complicated topic, and there's lots of different ways to go about this conversation, but I know for me, after 17 years of not watching porn and then finally allowing myself to watch porn if I wanted to, I found that once I was allowing myself to watch it, it didn't have any type of craving or addictive power over me at all, because it was just like it was way more powerful of a draw when it was off limits and when I thought it was wrong and bad. And then once I was able to watch it whenever I wanted, I barely ever did want to watch it. I mean, I probably watched it a bunch in the beginning just because I wanted to see what was out there and I enjoyed it. But and that's the thing. I also have a 16-year-old son, and I personally do not mind if he watches porn. What I would be more wanting to have a conversation with him about is, hey, this is not real sex, but this is entertainment. Um, this is, the body types and all this are, not, it's kind of like watching a movie versus real life, like I would want to educate my son, and I do, about like this is entertainment value. This is not, maybe not realistic bodies or sexual positions or all that. Like I would much rather address it from a more sex positive view. It's not like the porn is inherently bad, but here's to how to be like if you're going to consume it, just know what it is and know what it isn't. So I used to be very anti porn and even like wrote about it and spoke about it and wanted to like protest hustler Hollywood and all this stuff. And now I'm just like, honestly, if it's not hurting you or your relationship, I don't see it as a problem. I could see it as just a way to have a little fun. I don't see it. I don't demonize it in and of itself anymore.
I think the approach of having that conversation with your son is important. It's like with anything. It's like, for example, taking recreational drugs. I think you'd much rather have that conversation while they're young and talk to them about, okay, what it does to your brain, and be safe with it, and then that way it's not hidden away and it's brought to the surface. So I certainly see the benefits of that. And I think with the vices part, it reminds me of my journey with alcohol, right? And you see this a lot with guys where they'll see alcohol as a bad thing, and what they'll do is, because it's this bad thing, they'll stay away from it, and then they'll suddenly go on a binge and get shit faced on a night out, and it comes back to the same argument as before of not actually wanting it in your life. And the way I did that was getting into jujitsu. And what I did was I had training on a Saturday morning. Well, okay, how would I get the most out of that? It would be by getting an early night on Friday, not having alcohol, and then I'd feel at my best. I'd get a natural high from jujitsu, and then I'd be focused on my work during the week. So I think a big part of the journey is not actually wanting it in the first place and having better things to do. And I think when we talk about men on their growth journey, and this is another reason why, again, I want to refrain from using bad or good and putting labels on it, but a reason why I think I'm against porn on the growth journey for a man is because, especially if you're ambitious and you're an ambitious man and you want to develop certain parts of of your lifestyle and you're taking stuff seriously, I think there's ways, at least for me, there were better uses of my time, right? So I had all the stuff I wanted to do, so I wouldn't have time for anything that was not in alignment with that. So I wonder if on the porn issue, it's really having that conversation with yourself, sitting with yourself, if you have the urge to do so, and being like, okay, what feelings coming up here that I'm perhaps trying to avoid, and okay, what do I actually want to be doing? I say that I value personal development. Well, maybe reading a book would be a better use of my time. And I know a big cycle, because obviously, yeah, growing up with guys and working with guys as well, I think a big cycle is they will watch porn and then feel lots of shame and guilt after it, and they're like, "What the fuck have I just done?" So I think that's a big part of it, and the shame aspect is the biggest one, and I think a lot of guys really struggle with it, and it's really prevalent, really prevalent.
Yeah, well, that's the thing is I used to have a lot of shame about it too. And, I thought I was a porn addict, but it turned out as I got into therapy and started doing my own healing, that shame that I felt about using porn mostly came from religion and being told that it was sinful and wrong and bad. And once I was able to release, I mean, I'm not religious anymore. I was able to kind of just, I just don't believe that anymore. But so now I don't have shame about it because I don't think it's wrong. And so it's interesting. Now, I know not everybody's going to go the route I did, but like if I watched porn tonight, I wouldn't have any shame about it at all because I just move on to the next thing. And so I think one thing that's probably an important distinction is I work with a lot of people that have left religion. So they have been really sexually suppressed their whole life and not been able to do a lot of things sexually that they wanted to do. I know for me, like my sexual desire is one of my highest priorities. But I'm also wanting to be productive in my coaching business and in my therapy business. So it just depends on people's priorities, but I definitely don't personally recommend cutting off all your sexuality so that you can try and be successful. Like, I just think that can kind of, for me, I would feel very depressed if I didn't get to express myself sexually. I mean, there's a difference between letting that consume your life and letting yourself enjoy that. In in my perspective, but that again, I think you and I have came from different places too, so we might see it differently. You know what I mean?
And it's also worth considering your values are all shaped by your experiences of life, right? So I can totally imagine if you've repressed that side of you so long, it's going to be your highest. It's going to be the thing you value the most, and it's not just in this instance. I think in any instance, you're going to end up valuing what you didn't have when you were younger. It's as simple as that. If it was a very chaotic household at home, you're going to value a stable one when you're older. And so many other instances of that. And maybe you didn't pursue something when you were younger that you're passionate about. Well, when you're older, suddenly you're going to want to pursue that again. So I think all of these experiences will shape our value, our belief system, and the values piece you've mentioned before. I think that's really important, knowing what you actually value, not what society values, and what you should be valuing, and being true to that from a grounded place. If you value this and knowing what your values are, then you can structure your life a certain way. I know in my instance, there's a book called Think and Grow Rich, for example, and Napoleon Hill talks about using that sexual energy to do something great in the world. And a lot of people in their 20s and perhaps 30s, they don't know how to harness and use that sexual energy to a business and something great. And I think it was 6 to 8, let's just say 8 types of scenarios in your life where your brain reaches a new level of creativity where you just get ideas bouncing, bouncing, bouncing. And sex actually is one of them, funnily enough. But he mentioned how if you can harness that sexual energy and build something while you're young, this is if you are ambitious and this is one of your values, right? Then you can create something really meaningful. And so again, it comes back to the value system. I think when this whole idea of like sex and pornography comes in, it's okay, what do you actually value? And like you were suggesting, if you do value, growing in terms of a business or building something for yourself, then okay, is that behavior in alignment with it? And then that way, I think we could both agree on this. It's that way you're going to be living in alignment either way. If it is sexual expression in the physical form that you value most, then yeah, do your thing. And I wonder how people, what your stance is on people expressing their sexuality in other ways, right? Because obviously there's, say you want safe sex and you want to be able to express these parts of yourself in a way that isn't destructive. So how do people integrate these parts of themselves in your experience and with the guys that you've been working with?
Yeah, well, like a lot of it comes down to connecting with yourself. And like I said, I think just checking in with what you want to do sexually. And again, IFS is a helpful tool because it kind of, I work with people that have left religion, right? And some of them want to have a sexual experience, like maybe they've been married for 20 years and they want to have a sexual experience with another person other than their partner. Well, that could be potentially problematic if they're married and monogamous. So, like, if I were to work with somebody like that, we would, and I've done this with people before, get to know the part of them that wants to have sex with someone else, get to know the part of them that is monogamous, maybe get to know a part of them that wants to talk to their partner about being non-monogamous. Um, finding a safe way to do it that involves consent with all parties. I mean, that's what I did within my relationship with my wife. But I mean, kind of use that as an example. We celebrated our 20-year anniversary yesterday, so we've been together a long time, but we wanted to have experiences outside of our connection with other people. So, but well, we don't believe in cheating. We believe in communicating, and so to me, it's about you know kind of tuning into what you want to do, and then communicating with the people in your life so that you're doing it in an ethical way that's not hurting anybody.
Yes, and I imagine a big part of that is open communication, speaking with your partner, and actually knowing, okay, is this something I want to explore, or is this coming from a place where, oh, actually, But then you mentioned there before, sometimes it's not necessarily about healing that part of yourself. So I wonder where the line is between, okay, and this just fascinates me, not just on a sexual level, but in all parts of us. It's like, okay, there's this shadow part to yourself. There's this part there. Is this something that perhaps you'd like to heal, or is this just a part of you? And I find this really, really fascinating because you meet people and they're like, oh, it's just part of who I am. And yeah, it's really interesting. I guess it just comes down to the individual and whether they want it or not, right?
And that's the thing why you can't, in my opinion, you can't automatically come to that part of you that wants to be sexual in some way. You can't go into that interaction with that part of you assuming you know what's going on. And that's why IFS is interesting. It's a very different way of relating to yourself because it's not going in and being like, okay, I want to have sex with someone other than my wife, for example. If I was to get to know that part of me, I wouldn't come at it saying, you're bad, you're wrong, I want to fix you, I need to heal you. Or I wouldn't go at that part saying, oh, you're just a natural part of me, let's just go do that. But with IFS, we come to get to know the part from a place of openness and curiosity. So we actually get to know the part. It sounds very weird if you're not kind of already, if you've never tried this, it sounds a little weird, but you actually get to know the part through listening to it and get to know from it why it's doing it. It's different. It's a totally different way of relating to yourself.
Yeah, I think it'd be good for the people listening. What is internal family systems and how perhaps could they apply it to their own life if something has come up for them?
Yeah, well, it's a type of therapy, but it can also be used in like coaching and other people practice it other than therapists, but it just depends how deep and how because it is something you can use to heal your trauma, but basically sees the psyche as made up of different parts of you that have different jobs and different roles. But it also sees you as having like inherently yourself. And so it basically is a modality to help you from yourself get to know the different parts of you, the different behaviors. It helps you on a very deep level learn to understand why you're doing what you're doing. It's also like a very self compassionate approach. So it really is just like a very open hearted way to understand yourself and get to know yourself and become like get a relationship with yourself. And so, that's like in Rewilding Desire. I don't use it to heal trauma since it's coaching, but I help people understand what parts of them are active, like what parts of them want to be sexual, what parts of them maybe are afraid of them being sexual or trying to control their sexuality, trying to shame them for being sexual. So you can get to know like the part of you that wants to shame you for being sexual, get to know the part of you that wants to be sexual. So it basically helps you get to know yourself in a very intimate way. Um, and it just brings a lot of what we deal with that keeps us stuck is a lot of shame about just who we are. That who we are is bad and wrong, and we don't realize that we're doing different behaviors for a reason. And these parts of us are just trying to keep us alive. And so it's a very healing way to relate to yourself, honestly.
I wonder if a big part of it is just acceptance, right? And even if there was, for example, a right way of handling your sexuality, not that there is right, because I appreciate it's all subjective and there's going to be different societal and religious constructs, but even if there was a right way of doing things and okay, you should get married and have a stable family unit and the usual narrative, even if there is that part, it's just embracing that, okay, you know what, I'm actually just happy the way I am. I'm not going to change myself just to sort of suit this ideal of what I should be and what society expects of me. It's just who I am, and it's accepting that. And I imagine a lot of the resistance comes because they think they have to get to this stage in their life. They think they have to show up a certain way, but they actually don't want to do it. And I wonder if that's a big part of a journey, just accepting who you are. And it's either okay, if you want to change it, then that's something to explore. But if you don't want to change it, you don't actually have to, and you don't have to fit in somebody else's narrative, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it is self-acceptance and self-compassion, but you still can change things. Like it just can help you change it from more of a place of self-love than self-hate. And, I would say if I would say there's one right or one wrong way to do sexuality, in my opinion, is the question is it harming yourself or others? And is there consent involved? You know? Like to me, that's just the basics about, at least in my view, what would make good or bad sexuality is, if I'm not harming anyone, myself or others, or this is consenting between consenting adults.
And I see this a lot in our culture where people get into short term relationships, for example. And I find this fascinating because you see it a lot where the guy might be upfront with their partner or their sexual partner, and they will say, hey, this is a short term thing. And they can tell that the other person is putting energy into this and liking them. So I'm really curious because I see this a lot in Western culture. So I wonder if you would consider that perhaps harming somebody else, even though they're aware of what they've got themselves into, and if both parties are on the surface consenting, but you're aware that the relationship is imbalanced. And expanding on this, I'd love to hear how this intertwines with exploring your sexuality and the perhaps detriments of hookup culture as well.
Well, that's the thing. Like, someone might go into a relationship just saying, like, hey, I just want a friends with benefits. If that's the agreement, they're communicating about it, then to me, the problem would be is if one of them wanted something different but wasn't communicating it. So I wouldn't see the arrangement as inherently bad, but it's a communication issue. And if somebody changes what they want, it'd be something that they would need to be communicating about. Because that's the thing. Yeah, like if these things aren't communicated about, then I think it can become harmful. But some people might have a different relationship dynamic than is normal, considered normal in the culture. Like a lot of people are non-monogamous or polyamorous or have different ways of having relationships that aren't, are traditionally, approved of, so to speak, in our Western culture. But yeah, to me, it's all about consent and communication.
Yeah, yeah, and there's a big responsibility piece as well. I think just owning what you're feeling in the moment and not shying away from it and not living a lie too. I think a lot of the time, and I've seen this on the show with several guests already, people are living a lie. They're staying in a relationship they don't really like, but they kind of stay with that narrative anyway. And I think if we're just honest with ourselves, then I think we'll end up finding what's right for us. And yeah, I'm interested to hear your opinion on sex as an energy exchange, right? Because it is I think can be a very spiritual practice, and there's a big exchange of energies there. And I wonder, okay, you see people expressing themselves sexually, and if you're perhaps a young man on a growth journey and you want to explore your sexuality, but I think how often do we forget about how big sex is and part of an energy exchange and what that can actually do? I mean, you hear about, I know there's a lot of guys online talking about having sex with people, you inherit their traumas and all this other stuff. And there's lots of ways people view sex, right? I'd love to hear your opinion on that.
I wouldn't say this is 100% true, but I do try and base my perspectives more in like kind of what's like research based or like what has some like scientific valid, backing. So I guess I try and not that I'm against people having like spiritual beliefs around sexuality, like that's totally up to them, but I guess kind of I see sexuality as more of like a place to express yourself, express your creativity, express your passion, express maybe your dominance or submission, or just like, I don't know. I see it as like a place to express your art, a place to like let down your guard and just be uninhibited and free to be yourself in a way that we don't really get to be in many other contexts. So to me, like as somebody that's suppressed themselves most of their life, I feel like if I can have a place to express myself freely sexually, it only enhances the other areas of my life.
It's always, again, it just comes back to how you're feeling after. If something doesn't feel right in your body after, then that's usually a sign. And we've spoken a lot on the podcast about listening to the signals that your body is telling you. If you don't feel great after a sexual experience or encounter, or any encounter for that matter, then that's usually a sign that, okay, this isn't aligned, and maybe you've gone into this too quickly, and maybe you thought you wanted this thing, but perhaps there's something deeper going on. So I think a big lesson from what we've talked about is actually, yeah, being true to yourself, understanding these parts of yourself, knowing your values, and yeah, I think just being honest with yourself and taking responsibility for everything that you do. And I think it's a great shame in the religious sense, right? When it's this, okay, this is the only way to do things, and anything aside from that, because it pushes people away. And I think the essence of a lot of religion, it actually all comes back to love. I think a lot of the preachers at the time, they just preach love and love everyone, and yeah, everyone's made in God's image, so love everyone else. And yeah, this shaming, I think I can see how it's caused a lot of trauma over the years by trying to fit into this ideal and okay, well, God's not going to accept me the way I am. And yeah, I can imagine, especially, I mean, now I think very fortunate that we're living in this era where it's so widely accepted now, but it's crazy to think about. It was less than 100 years ago, even sooner, where homosexuality was illegal in the UK. And yeah, it's I think that is still wild to me for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, I mean, I would love more religious folks to focus more on the love and made in the image of God. Like, to me, that sounds great. But unfortunately, a lot of people are using religion to harm people and to, judge. And I mean, at least here in the US, like, it's doing, to me, in my perspective, like, religion is one of the biggest hate groups in our country. Unfortunately, it's marginalizing a lot of people. But then there's a lot of really good Christian folks that I'd say love people and want to include everybody. And so it's, yeah, religion could be really used for good or evil, I think. And so I'm with you on that, like focusing on the love and we're all in this together. Like I'm all for that.
Yeah, and it's funny you see a lot of guys who were pushed away from religion. They grew up in a religious household and then went full atheist, and then have ended up getting back in touch with their spiritual side because they haven't had this agenda and this perspective pushed upon them, and then they find it naturally. I think that's and it's you see it as well with a lot of guys. I think there is a curiosity with spirituality, but because of that negative perception of religion, they've been pushed away, and this idea of heaven and hell and you're going to be punished. And I think I can see how people get disillusioned with that idea. And yeah, but again, as we've seen with your story, I think it's that pain can become your greatest purpose. And it's really, really, really cool to see how you're using your experience to help other people explore these sides of yourself. And it's a really cool, almost like a niche as well, though I imagine it's quite a big proportion of people who have got these sides to themselves and are dealing with a lot of hidden shame. Yeah, so I think that's really, really cool, really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's very meaningful. And yeah, it's just thank you for the conversation. I think it's really, really valuable to look at all of this.
Yeah, and I think there's so many areas we can discuss. I think we'll move on to the closing traditions. I was really keen to hear touch upon a topic which I'm super interested in. A lot of the guys I've been working with are interested in too. Is this idea of kind of like semen retention and retaining your seeds to then use that powerful energy force. And
Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
it's something I've realized as well, where when you retain your seed, if you will, if you don't ejaculate, and if you retain that within you, you can become so powerful. Your energy increases. I think just the way you approach life, a lot more confidence as well. It's something that I'm really interested in, and I know in the spiritual world as well, they talk about how it's a huge essence of your spirituality, the way you go about doing things. I don't, but I've also seen how a lot of guys would attempt. There was this no fat movement, and I remember at school it was a big one where it was like a challenge, like how many days can you go without masturbating or engaging in this behavior. And I did find it fascinating because I know a lot of guys would be like, "Oh, I've gone for a month," and I do think if you're a man and you can control your sexual desire, I think that makes you very powerful in a way because the sexual urge and desire is so strong. So I'd love to hear your stance on that, and also if you saw any benefits from. I know it's not the way you would approach things now, but if you saw any benefits from abstaining completely in terms of your energy levels or your outlook on life.
I mean, well, definitely from a time management perspective, like not pursuing sexual directions, does kind of help you focus in and really get, I mean, it helps you focus on other things that may be more of a priority. I personally don't know much about that. I mean, I would encourage people to do whatever they want, but I guess what I would say is if you decided to do that for yourself, check in with yourself first. Because if there is a sexual part of you that really needs to have a sexual expression or even a sexual release to be happy, I would be very cautious about telling that part to just shut up and don't worry about it. We're going to focus on being successful instead. So I would much rather people or recommend that people check in with themselves first and not just do it because everyone's saying it's the cool way to do things. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's figuring out what works for you and trying stuff out. And again, it comes back to the message that not one size fits all. And I am intrigued because I do think society as a whole has become very sexualized. You see it in the movies and you see it all the time. And I also wonder with young men growing up, and you go on Instagram and there's all these, especially if your algorithm's messed up, there's going to be half naked women and OnlyFans, and it's just in front of your face all the time. And I do think if you are able to desexualize your brain, sometimes then you can make more rational decisions, right? And we spoke about before, you might not be aware of your sexual desires, and I imagine this is why a lot of men go on and end up being dishonest because they can't control that sexual desire. And I think a lot of the time we might pick partners who we're sexually attracted to, but what actually else is there underneath, and are you actually connected to this person? And so I know in my journey I found, and this is just from personal experience, but I found it a great advantage when I began reflecting on myself. Once I desexualized my brain, I saw the world completely differently, and you start almost just acting as a human being. And I do, and again, coming back to before, I think a big concern I have is this objectification of women and seeing women as objects. And yeah, I think when sexuality isn't explored in a healthy way, especially when you're young, I think your views on relationships with women can become very distorted. So I do see, I think, again, depends on the individual. Of course, naturally, if you've been suppressing this part of yourself for so long, it's going to be a different story. Although I would say if you are in a cycle of perhaps womanizing all the time and different partners, and you perhaps haven't just really questioned it, I think there can be an advantage to perhaps going celibate for a while and just seeing how you react and just getting to know. I think this is what this whole episode's about, just getting to know yourself better and what's really going on beneath the surface, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. You could already tell, like, I'm pretty cautious about saying one way of doing things is the only way to do it, you know? But I do like that kind of self-experimenting and approaching these decisions from a place of self-connection first. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm all about that. Instead of just mindlessly, to me, if you don't take the time to actually get to know yourself and understand yourself at a deep level, you really have no freedom. You're just on autopilot, and your parts are deciding what type of life you're going to live, and you won't be free. You'll be basing your decisions on avoiding pain, and it'll probably be the pain that's linked to your past pain that needs to be healed. So, to me, if you really want freedom and to live authentically, you got to do the deeper work. You can't just go about life just deciding from your intellectual mind what you're going to do because your parts will be in charge. That's my perspective.
I really really enjoyed that. I think that's a wicked way to round up the podcast. And again, it's like not denying these parts of ourselves exist, but okay, how can we work with them and integrate them into our everyday life? So important, really important.
Awesome. Yeah, totally.
Wicked. Yeah, what we'll do, we'll move into the closing traditions. If you have been tuning in, I can see we've got one question already. leave your questions in the live chat, anything that's come up during this conversation. So many themes. And yeah, what a wicked story. The first two questions are routine and they are asked at the end of every episode. So the first question is simply a song recommendation for the audience.
Oh man, that is so hard. I love music, so I'm like constantly listening to music. A song recommendation? Oh man, that's wow. You'd think that would be an easy thing. Here's a song recommendation. It's Sleep Token. Emergence. Yeah,
Emergence, brilliant. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out.
check it out. It's epic.
Yeah, and I love asking that question because songs I think always evoke an emotion out of us too, and there's
Yeah,
so much that can,
totally.
yeah, that we can learn from
Totally.
those. So yeah, thank you for those. And yeah, the second one is a book recommendation.
Yeah, you know, on the topic of sexuality, this I have this right next to me, but it's called The Sex You Want. It's a shameless journey to deep intimacy, honest pleasure, and a life you love. It's really good for people that are exploring sexuality. And then, can I say more than one?
Absolutely,
Okay. Well, there's some good books on like IFS. There's a friend of mine just published a book. It's called From Broken to Badass, and it's an IFS book. Close friend of mine wrote it, and it's just amazing. So I would highly recommend it.
wicked. Yeah, I'll definitely be checking both of those out, and I think you're also the first guest who's written a book but hasn't recommended it, and I can see based off our conversation why you haven't.
Well, I actually unpublished my book, so I you can't buy it unless you want to spend like $50. But I am working on a new book that's based on how I perceive things now in my journey because I think that that will really be helpful in the world. So I do plan on doing more writing because, yeah, I just love to inspire people and help them heal and live the life that they want to live.
Yeah, and I think you're a wicked example as well because you wrote the book before about you mentioned about porn and about the recovery there, and I think it's really awesome that you've changed your perspective on that because change is always a signal of growth, right? It's a sign that you've changed your perspective, and that's a big lesson for a lot of guys who are listening. It's okay to change your opinions, and you might be so certain about something, but yeah, you're gonna learn and grow. When is the new book coming out?
That's a great question. I'm just now launching Rewilding Desire coaching program, so I think after I launch that, then I'll really start focusing on the book. So I don't know exactly, but hopefully within the next year or two. I'd say if people follow me on Instagram or wherever else I do social media, like or my website, like yeah, if they want to follow my work, like they'll know. But I definitely look forward to putting that out there soon.
Wicked. Yeah, we'll definitely put that in the description after this episode. And yeah, we've had a couple questions here, but just because you've mentioned it too, yeah, Marie would like to find out more about rewilding desire and what that might entail.
Yeah, well, it's kind of amazing timing because like this week is when I'm launching it, but it is IFS based, and it's basically it's really fits with what we're talking about in this episode. It's like helping people, guiding people in connecting with themselves and connecting with their sexual desires, and kind of understanding the parts of them that maybe keep them from kind of being like their wild sensual self. And so it's really just a way to help people pursue what they want sexually and work through whatever things are stopping them from doing that. So it's exciting, and yeah, it's just like a really fun way to support people, but using IFS to really help people experience a very deep self connection. It's not just me teaching them how to have better sex.
Yes, and I like the coaching. I think coaching aspect can be very forward thinking. It can be a nice approach to it. I think a lot of people put off therapy sometimes because they fear they'll be like stuck in the past and reliving traumas over and over again.
Totally,
And
totally.
yeah, I think coaching is a wicked way for people to kind of look forwards because, yeah, the past is helpful in us understanding these parts of ourselves, but it doesn't define us. And I think a big part of the transformation journey is looking forwards and thinking about the man that you want to become in the future. And yeah, looking at that vision and ties back to our conversation about these habits and the stuff that perhaps doesn't feel right for you or you feel is holding you back. Maybe just shift your perspective onto that future version. Think, okay, how do I want to show up, and who's the person that I want to be? So yeah, really excited to see that when that comes out, and yeah, learning more about that.
Yeah, anything that just helps us release the things that stop us from being who we want to be, you know? Like there's no reason why we can't pursue the life that we want. And you know, all the voices of self-doubt and fear and all that, they really don't need to hold us back from those things.
Absolutely. And yeah, we've got two more questions come in. The first one is from Jamie, and it was, Forrest, I would love to hear your perspective. How do you support someone you care for who seems to rely on vices to manage their emotions, especially when they don't want to talk about what they're going through? I think if you're, yeah, so if you're supporting someone else who is using vices, because I imagine that dynamic is tricky when, because obviously we want to grow ourselves, but then if someone close to us isn't open to growth, how do you support someone in that way?
Yeah, that is hard. I mean, it's hard because and I've been really, I've had people like that in my life too, that, you know, addicts and all of that. But yeah, I mean, just encouraging them to get help and, um, and trying to give them as much love as you can while also kind of protecting your own boundaries, you know, not realizing there's only a limit to how much you can do. But I'd say the more love and compassion you can bring to them while also protecting yourself and encouraging them to get help is really the best.
Once you've encouraged them, there's going to be, that's all you can do really, and then it's kind of up to them. I think once you've planted that seed, sometimes perhaps the if you're constantly telling them, that might almost put them off, and they might create a stronger ego, stronger defense mechanisms. So yeah, and I believe, yeah, the only thing you can do is, I think if you show up in love, then I think, and it's a conversation, yeah, we've had actually where, okay, if you show up as your loving self, then that will actually inspire people to make change as well. And you can have a ripple effect that way. But like you said, I think the boundaries part, protecting your own energy, I think that's really difficult, really, really difficult. And yeah, I wonder how you've protected your energy in the past when, as you've suggested, people just live differently. They just don't get it. Like I know, yeah, one example someone gave was forming a protective bubble, like imagining there's a bubble around you and no one can sort of get into it. And I know you mentioned you were sort of hyper aware back in your childhood. So is that, I'd love to hear how you've retrained your brain and not and be able to protect your energy in the process of communicating with people.
Well, and yeah, that's the thing. I think if people are really make time to connect with themselves and their needs, that will help them determine like what boundaries to have. Because if they're like giving so much to another person that they like disown themselves or sacrifice themselves or what's important to them, that's like really not going to be, it's harming them, you know? And like that's the thing. To help somebody else shouldn't mean to harm yourself, you know? So it's like really learning to appreciate your own needs and values and wants and like learning to like, yeah, just value that as valid and important. And you know, like not sacrifice yourself or hurt yourself to help somebody else. You know, that just, I mean, I've done that throughout my whole childhood, so I know like what that, it's got a hefty cost and it's very painful.
Yeah, just consciously putting in boundaries in place with yourself and not trying to, yeah, just change or help or fix everyone because it's yeah, it's a struggle, but it's a real problem.
It is hard, yeah.
And Martine, and yeah, Jamie says great perspectives. Thank you. And Ma- Martine says, Forrest, what do you think motivates the makers of porn to produce their material?
There's a couple of different pieces to this because there is such a thing as ethical porn. And so I think a lot of people that make ethical porn just make it because yeah, like it's an art form. Like they want to show people what sexuality is about. I don't think and just the basic answer is that they make it because it turns people on and it sells, you know? Like it's a product, it's an entertainment product. So I think that's why people do it. I don't think they have like an evil agenda to try and, you know, harm people or, you know, make everyone addicted. I don't know. I don't know. That's my I don't know. Some people in the porn industry probably are really bad depending on the type of I'd say anything that has to do with like exploiting children or sex trafficking or anything like that. I mean, those I would say those people are definitely, you know, doing bad things in the world, but then I know there's a lot of people producing porn that are just doing it to express themselves and because it's fun and because it makes money. I mean, yeah, I think there's a spectrum. It's not just all porn is bad and or you know what I mean?
How do you think you differentiate then in terms of sort of which women or which people are sort of trafficked and then which are and which is sort of, as you say, ethical porn? Because it's, I think that's another one which really, and I think in a positive way. I remember there was a lot of publicity about okay the realities of porn, and you'd have women being interviewed about how they would be drawn in for a photo shoot. They were told they were going for a photo shoot, and then they were trapped and said, right, you have to do this now. And I know that's really rife. So I think that was, I know reading the comments and talking to people after that, it actually, that was sort of the thing that kind of put them out of it, because they were like, hang on, this is terrible. How can I get behind this? So how do you differentiate? Because it's difficult to know. There's not like you have. I mean, I don't know because it's not my thing, but I can't imagine there's like an ethical porn site out there. So how do you differentiate when there is, as you suggest, like a really dark side to a lot of this?
Well, yeah, that's the thing is there are ethical porn sites out there that you know like they will tell you on there like everybody that it played you know a role in this the making of this pornography was you know paid a fair wage, you know physical health was a factor. Everybody was over 18, everybody consented, you know everybody's here because they want to be here, you know like there are porn sites like that. Pornhub is not like that. Like Pornhub is probably like everybody can put anything on there and who knows what's on there. You know, who knows? But there are ethical porn sites and you know, honestly there's places where you can buy porn directly from the person creating it. So you can actually kind of form a relationship with them and then you know like this is an adult and they're choosing to do this and so yeah, it's just a different so that's the thing. I don't think it's a black and white issue. And I think it's great that people don't want to harm people. That's awesome. Like, I don't want to harm people either. I don't want to harm children or people being trafficked or abused or exploited. Like, hell yeah, that's really good motives. But yeah, I think there's definitely ways to find ethical porn that's not hurting anybody.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I wasn't aware of that side to it, and yeah, it's just a fascinating. Yeah, it's just a fascinating conversation and seeing that other side to it. And yeah, I think also accepting, right, coming into this, having very like different ideas. And I think it's definitely open mind up to, although I haven't, I don't know if I would fully endorse the use of porn, because I can see how damaging it can be. I can also see how talking about it can really help men, and talking about their sexual desires with other men, safe men who won't judge them for it. And I can also see how the massive benefits of understanding these parts of ourselves and integrating that and really being true to ourselves and what our actual desires are can be really, really helpful for men too. And I know a lot of guys I know hold a lot of like sexual shame, and they that's a part of themselves they really struggle to move through. So I'd love to finish off by asking if you had any advice for people who, for whatever reason, there'll be many, but perhaps they've maybe had a previous sexual encounter that was a bit embarrassing, or maybe there's just something about them that they're just really ashamed by, and they perhaps struggle to be open, and they struggle to have the sex that they want and the intimacy that they want. Where do they start? What advice would you have for them?
Yeah. Well, shame is really damaging and it really has no value whatsoever. And I mean, guilt is a little different, but I think it really comes down to not judging yourself and not judging your like past self. But you can still learn from the decisions you've made. I mean, I've made lots of sexual decisions that I regret or that I regret, but not because I chose to do them, but because there was, a lesson that came with them. And so I would just encourage people, don't judge yourself or think that something's bad about you, but see what you can do to learn from the experience and maybe apply that to the future and make different decisions. But shaming yourself or saying that you're bad or unworthy or a piece of crap for any of this is all bad. And so the more you can love and bring compassion and understanding to yourself and even discover things about yourself sexually that maybe you are different than what culture or religion thinks you should be. You're beautiful inside, and your sexuality is, I think, one of the most beautiful things about you. So it's not something to judge or condemn.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, super wise words. Forrest, this has been a wicked conversation. I was definitely excited coming into this, and yeah, super engaging and lots of great perspectives too. Certainly a mind opener for people listening, and I love that last piece of advice too. So yeah, really, really awesome. Where can people find you if they're interested in the work that you do?
Yeah, so I have forrestbenedict.com for my therapy practice and rewildingdesire.com for my coaching practice. And I'm also on Instagram at Forrest Benedict, LMFT, and Rewilding Desire. And I'm just starting all this Instagram. I'll be on Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and YouTube. So I'll be around, but yeah, I would say the websites or social media is kind of the place to find me right now.
Wicked. Yeah, we'll certainly put all of those in the description. So definitely check them out if you're listening to this. And thanks very much, Forrest. And really appreciate your time. And yeah, wicked questions. Stay tuned for the next one. And yeah, appreciate you.
Thank you, Harrison. So great to be here.